Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Growth Support Conversation. My name is Neal, and today I'm joined by Stephen Nock to talk about the balance between employee experience and customer experience, how much plays into each other, and where can you find the balance between the two. So before we dive into that, Stephen, you want to introduce yourself, where you're coming from, and a little bit about yourself?
Happy to do that, and thanks for having me. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Where do we find the balance? I have about 12 years of experience in customer experience in startups, originally in the US, where I'm from, and more recently in Germany, where I moved about 8 years ago, and where I've continued to explore mostly technology startups. And I would say over the past 5 years, I really started to get interested in what were some of the inhibitors that might lead to a not good customer experience. Oftentimes, I see that can be in the employee experience. That led me to become trained as a coach about 3 years ago. And last year, I pivoted into coaching full time. And so I support people who are in transitions, and I also support teams in workplaces in thinking about how can we make this a place where everyone can thrive.
I love that balance and difference as well in terms of the transition and helping others to also do the same when it comes to those experiences. I'm curious, well, oftentimes, I would say we just hit the hot take right away. A lot of people just say the best CX is a really good EX. In terms of really making sure that your customer experience is driven by how well you treat your people. I think the underlying tone is the better you treat your people, the better help the customers. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that and kind of what you generally think of that statement.
I would generally lean toward agreeing, but I think there's some nuance to it in terms of what does it mean to treat people well. Of course, that needs to speak to what are the needs of those individual people. It would be easy maybe to say, oh, more perks, the classic example, especially in the startup space, is like, let's make sure there's a fruit basket in the kitchen. That's not treating people well necessarily. Sure, it's nice to eat well, but how are we really showing up and understanding the needs of our team and what they need to really do their job well? I think is where the conversation is maybe a better place to start.
Yeah, indeed. I think what you define as the actual experience of an employee and the agent needs in that sense for your team to be successful is really, really important. It's not just the side perks, pizza parties, and things like that. I don't think that's culture or customer experience or even employee experience in that sense, but really digging deep. So I'm curious to dive a little bit deeper into that. What is employee experience to you?
I think it's like I mentioned a little bit in my own intro, it's creating the conditions where employees can thrive. That doesn't mean that they always are thriving. I think we all have our own spectrum. And that's what motivates a lot of my work is I know what it feels like to show up to work, whether that's figuratively or literally on a day where I feel like I can give 100%. And I know what it feels like where I might not feel like I can give 100%. So employee experience is all of the initiative and practices that we can explore that are thinking about how can we maximize the potential that people do feel like they can thrive.
So create that baseline and that environment where they have the room to be able to do that, rather than just saying, hey, everyone is thriving, we're doing amazing, but kind of ignoring some of those factors that play into the difference between playing to individuals versus playing to the business versus playing to your customers, in that sense. I have a bit of a trifecta when it comes to whose needs you need to balance as a support leader when you're considering, processes, product, how you go about doing things. And typically that is, you need to balance customer needs with business needs, with your team needs, and find a balance between the three of them where, yes, you want to drive business outcomes, but you don't want to burn your team out doing so in that sense. And you want to really be able to serve customers, but you don't always want it to be, the customer is always right and pushing your team under them in that sense. How do you think you can try and find a balance between those when you go about your normal day to day?
Um, I do like the word balance, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily the right starting point because oftentimes we have to make a choice. And so I think it can really help for a business to also define the priorities. Um, I come from kind of an entrepreneurial background. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, owned a business for a long time. And in his business, which my mom is now a part of, they always say, we put our employees before our customers. Uh, and they're very transparent about that with their customers. They're very transparent about that with their employees. And I kind of like that approach of saying, we are here to invest in training and supporting our employees to do their best work. And we trust that based on that foundation, they will, do the best to understand the needs of the customer to make the right decision also for the business. So in that way, I think it can also not necessarily be about balancing, but by saying, if we put our best investment into our employees, everything comes subsequently.
Hmm. I think that's really a healthy way to look at it in terms of defining that priority. I'm I'm curious to get your thoughts on where you think this breaks down the most, because it seems like a really easy decision to make when it comes to taking care of your people and taking care of customers. Why do you think this has grown as such a widespread topic?
I think it breaks down. I mean, there's so many different business models and so many different businesses and experiences that we all have. When I see it oftentimes as a customer, which is like one of the main flags that I know I'm still very passionate about customer support, customer experience, it's when an agent, an employee doesn't feel empowered to um, support the customer to make the decision that might be obviously right, to understand the situation and to do something about it. Sometimes we put policies and procedures in place, and the employee who's there working with a customer would rather default to that policy or practice than to really get curious and figure out what could be a solution there. And so, um, uh, when we want to try to be black and white and not recognize the gray area that's in so many different situations, I think is when it starts to fall apart.
Yeah, like the gray area is really important because every customer situation is a bit unique, and every employee themselves and rep and the way they go out trying to find solutions is also sometimes unique. So it kind of creates these, you know, customized solutions where you do want to empower reps to say, hey, let's make this really experience really, really good for you. And how do you actually empower them to make those decisions? Um, and not leave room for just cut and dry. Oh, no, policy can't. Sorry. I mean, in some cases, in compliance and stuff like that, yeah, there are some scenarios where you do have a lot of restrictions and limitations, but where possible, building in flexibility and building that sense of ownership and purpose for the customer experience with your employees is really important.
Yeah, and I kind of by accident have some experience with regulatory stuff too. Um, and a lot of people see regulation, whether it's GDPR or so many other I mean, every industry has its regulations. It's quite inhibitory. Especially in startups and smaller businesses, I like to try to lean into anything that is regulation compliance as a super helpful framework. If we have to make all these decisions by ourselves and start from scratch, it would be really difficult. So, in terms of customer experience, also, it doesn't need to be black and white, but what are the guardrails that we can give as kind of a foundation that then create the playground, the flexibility for people to explore, come up with decisions, add the bits and pieces that make it a really personal experience?
I love the way you put that, and just having this room to be able to break down different scenarios and work towards a personal experience as well when it comes to both agents and reps being able to create solutions and for customers receiving that solution in that sense as well. And really having guardrails around, like, hey, yeah, it's not cut and dry, it's not black and white, but it does have this kind of room to be able to move within. I think that's really, really important. I did this exercise with my team fairly recently. We did both sides of it. We said, hey, what do you think makes a really good customer experience? And think about yourself as a customer. And they just dumped all of their experiences that they have loved with service teams and their experiences that they've hated, and they broke it down. And then they also did the same for what makes a great agent experience. So they went through their own experience as an agent and thought of companies that they had worked at where it was poor and sometimes when it was really great. And we kind of break down all the things that we could do better. And some of the things that came up was when there's clear lines of communication, when we have the resources that we need, when we have the tools to actually be able to do our jobs well, when we have information readily at hand, when management backs us up. Is there anything that you think would play into really making this agent experience that much better?
Well, I think one perspective I like to take, and I think can be really transferable, why I would offer this now to kind of everyone, is to flip a lot of the frameworks that we use, just turn them around a little bit. And so, for example, everyone has metrics, whether it's customer satisfaction, reply time, customer effort score, all of these kind of things. Just for a thought exercise, playing with what would it look like to, turn the metrics that we're using to measure how well we're helping our customers to consider how well are we, supporting our employees. What, ask if we're taking customer effort score example, for example, how easy did we make it to solve your problem? Ask the employee, hey, how easy did we make it for you to help this customer? That might give really rich insight and data to understand, okay, in terms of employee experience and the conditions that our employees need to thrive, they're burning out if that's the case because, they're having to jump through hoops. They want to give the customer a good experience. Maybe they're very intrinsically motivated, but it might not be easy for them to give the customer a good experience. And so just taking that perspective that we often take toward the outside and turning inward and thinking about, are we measuring ourselves in the same way that customers might be measuring us? And if not, where might we want to renegotiate some of those values that we're paying attention to?
And it goes back to those priorities that you set as a business that you were talking about earlier as well, and making sure that, yeah, we are supporting our employees just as well as we support our customers, if not better in some cases. And you really want to make sure that that priority is there and in place.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about, agent effort score is a real metric. People should definitely use it and see how they can actually make improvements as a support operations team, at least, or as leadership in that sense as well. I'm curious because employee experience, in my opinion, is owned by quite a group of people. As a line manager, you're really, you're on the day-to-day, you're running the operations, you're working with your team. It's your responsibility as a manager to have that employee experience and manager relationship and create a good experience and partner with human resources or your teams to be able to really drive employee experience as a whole. Do you find that there's a distinction between who should own that employee experience and not?
Mm, I guess I don't see a lot of people who shouldn't own it, but I think that, if you have a chain of command, anything that's not flat in your hierarchy as an organization, the higher up you are, the more responsibility you have. I think it's helpful even when you're bringing people into an organization to um, start to talk about that every employee has the opportunity to own some of that experience. I always talk to team members who I had recently hired and saying, we hired you because, we vetted you, think you're really smart. That means don't wait to ask questions. Don't wait to point out things that you think could be better. I think if an employee doesn't speak up, it's most likely because they don't feel that they have the safe space, and I don't use that term lightly, to speak up. And so, what do we need to shift as an organization? If an employee isn't speaking up, that also probably represents a customer's voice that might not be heard. And I don't believe that a customer is always right, but I do believe that a customer always has the right to be heard. And so the higher up we go in the chain of communication, I think that we have more responsibility to be creating space where people feel not just safe, but really celebrated and cherished to speak up and to point out area of improvement. And we can't act on all of those things, but we can show that we're hearing, processing, receiving what people are sharing where there's room for improvement.
I think it goes back to really kind of creating those core values that you have as an organization as well. When you bring people in, what you mentioned, having trust in them, that you hired them for the right reason, that they have the expertise that you need to be able to do the job. And so building trust, building ownership, giving them ownership and purpose over what they do. And when it comes to closing that feedback loop and actually having people speak up, being able to actually do something with it and say, hey, yeah, you spoke up. This is what we actually did with it, and we turned it around, or we did action something in that sense, rather than a lot of people stop speaking up because what they say just goes into a void and then they give up after a while in that sense. So I think not only making sure that you give people the room and the safe space to do so, but also making sure that when they do say something, something is done with it when appropriate, and being able to actually bring that back into the experience.
Yeah, and I would take a little bit of a step back even, especially from my training as a coach, would do a lot of work with active listening. And I wish that that had been introduced to me sooner when I was a manager. I think despite the fact that humans are gifted with some unique thinking and communication abilities, we're really pretty bad at communicating most of the time and showing that we hear what the other person is saying. And so when I hear you saying, receiving the feedback and doing something about it, I think before we even do something about it, a lot of relationships can be built and a lot of trust can be maintained. And I think trust is one of the richest currencies that we have in an employee dynamic and also with customers. And so a lot of trust can be maintained just by showing that we heard what the other person is saying and taking time to make sure that we've understood their perspective. How many times do we also do something for a customer and then they're like, well, that's not what I was asking about. Well, then we missed the listening piece.
Yeah, that's a really good call out, making sure that you take the time to fully understand what the need is, and that is actually the right action to take in that sense. So it's really, really good that you mentioned that. And I love what you said before around, every customer might not be right, but they have the right to be heard, and also listening to that and being able to take that into account as well when it comes to the customer experience overall.
Yeah.
I think there's one question that I have for you would be, if there was something that a leader could do today to be able to improve their employee experience across the board. It doesn't matter if they have a really good experience or a really poor employee experience right now. What do you think is something that they could just take away from today and keep in mind as they move forward?
Um, One strategy that I like to encourage leaders to take is to ask your employees, your team members, to bring you all of the situations where they don't know. And I'm not saying like on a everyday basis, if you get stuck, just come to me immediately. Like leaders can't necessarily afford their attention to be split all the time, but create a space in whatever your team structure communication is, whether it's in your weekly meeting once a month and say, guys, everyone, let's come together and talk about where we might feel stuck, where we don't know. And for leaders to embody that too, because I think in the business world, we often get confused with the definition of confidence being, kind of fake it till you make it. And I think leaders need to create more space for personally role modeling. Hey, I don't know everything. I don't have all the answers. And also, I don't expect you to. It's really interesting the dynamic we have with AI right now, where we're leaning into let's just make sure we have all the answers, and how comfortable are we to say we're not gonna have everything all the time, but that's what humans are here for in the business world. We're here to figure out the new things, to solve problems. If we had all the answers all the time, our jobs would be pretty boring. So let's create more space to talk about what we don't know.
Yeah, I love that. One of the exercises that I love doing with my team, and I did this at two different phases, one with an existing and really established team, and once with new hires that we had just finished onboarding with. And with the new hires, when we did this exercise, the exercise was to just dump everything that they were doing in their day-to-days, mark it across this scale of like you go to the doctor's office, how painful is this thing? Like, oh, it doesn't hurt at all, it's fine, to like unbearable pain. And we went through and they just mapped all of their tasks to how they felt about them in this scale. And what we found is when we were going through it, it came down to about two things that really made up the most painful activities. And one of them was, I don't have the knowledge to do it. Like there's a big knowledge gap where we don't have process, we don't understand what is actually there. And number two was that, yeah, it's just super tedious or it's super clunky process or just like the operation behind it is bad. And with the ones that were knowledge gaps, what we did is we actually mapped them to three pillars. One was, I feel really confident about this thing. I feel like I want to know more about this thing, and I know nothing about this thing. And luckily, we had enough trust built within the team to be able to have that open conversation around it where people do feel comfortable speaking up. And then we said, okay, for these ones that you know nothing about, let's plan some sessions and let's kind of move them across the board to build them up in terms of knowledge. I love what you say. It's not necessarily our role to always understand everything and have every answer, but being able to identify and see where we can go seek out more knowledge and be able to learn about those things is definitely there. And I agree. If we had all the answers, our jobs would be pretty boring.
I
uh,
think so.
I have one more question for you, Stephen. Across your career, going from CX and support to now coaching and across the board, is there one thing that you've learned throughout your career that you really stick to today?
Mm. I guess the first thought that comes to mind, and this is not necessarily like a common thread, but something that's become more visible and more present to me in also moving geographies and getting exposed to different cultural experiences. I think that people are people everywhere. And we need to see that's what I think is also interesting about the CX, EX. Is it something we balance or not? Like, when you close your computer and you're going home and grocery shopping, you move from employee to customer. So we're all humans at the end of the day and we all have needs. And so I think the big question is for me is how are we supporting one another as a society to, make sure our needs are met? And sometimes I think we're overlooking that question.
So really being conscious of that and having that human experience at the end of the day where, we're all people just living life and
Yeah,
we're all
yeah.
trying to figure it out.
Like breaking news, we're all gonna die at the end of the day. So what are we doing to, support one another to have a good life along the way?
And make it the most valuable experience as possible and connect with each other, right?
Yeah. And I don't think that, there's also a lot of discussion about work-life balance. Like work is a very big part of life. Uh, and relationships are one of the biggest drivers of life satisfaction. That's what scientific research across generations has shown us. So how can we also use the relationships, whether that's employee to employee, employee to customer, to enrich our lives? I think that there are major opportunities in that in our work.
I love that as well, thinking and considering those actual relationships that you build. within your work and also outside of that, and finding the balance of where you spend your time and where you invest your energy as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me, Stephen, for the conversation. I really, really appreciate it. And I think it's been a really good one. I'm curious, if people want to continue that conversation, where's the best place to connect with you?
Best place to connect, definitely on LinkedIn. You can find me there. You can also find my coaching business. And yeah, you can also find that through the website andjoy.coach.
Nice. Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Neal.